A scream tore through the nursery wing, sharp enough to bring every guard in the corridor running, and Draven Ashford was already moving before his mind caught up with his body. His claws had broken through his fingertips. His shirt was soaked with sweat. He reached the nursery door and stopped as if he had hit a wall of ice, because on the other side of that door were his children, and the wolf inside him would not let him take one more step. Rowan was crying. Ivy had joined him a moment later, their twin voices rising together in the kind of wail that made every nerve in a father's body scream to act. Draven's hand found the doorframe and gripped it so hard the wood cracked under his fingers. He could smell them, milk and warmth, and the particular sweetness of infant skin, and still his wolf, Kale, refused to let him cross the threshold. It had been 4 months since Seraphine died. 4 months since the ambush at the eastern border had taken the only woman Kale had ever chosen, the only Luna the Ashwood pack had ever needed, and left 2 newborn pups without a mother. Since that night, Kale had not permitted a single soul near the nursery, except the 2 guards stationed outside its door. Not the healers, not the nursemaids, not even Draven himself, most days, though it was his own children on the other side of the wood. The guards exchanged a look. One of them, a young man named Idric, took a hesitant step toward the door. "My king, they haven't been fed since morning, the last nurse who tried." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone in the pack knew what happened to the last nurse who tried. She hadn't been harmed, not exactly, but Kale had risen so fast and so violently in Draven's chest that the king had blacked out for nearly a full minute, and when he woke, he found the nurse pressed against the far wall, pale as parchment, and never returned to the nursery wing again. Draven closed his eyes. Inside him, Kale paced, a restless shadow behind his ribs, snarling low every time the thought of surrender to failure crept into his mind. The Luna had been taken, because Draven had left the border undermanned. He had trusted the wrong report, dismissed the wrong warning, and Seraphine had paid with her life for his mistake. Kale had decided, in the raw animal logic that guided him, that trust itself was the danger. If no one could get close to the pups, no one could ever be the reason they were lost too. It made no sense. Draven knew it made no sense. His pups needed to be fed, changed, held, sung to sleep. They needed a mother's care that neither he nor his wolf could give, and still, every time someone stepped toward that door, Kale rose like a wall of dark water and drove them back. "Get someone from the kitchens," Draven said finally, his voice rough. "Anyone. Just bring warm milk to the door. I'll manage the rest." Idric hesitated, then nodded, and hurried off down the corridor. Draven pressed his forehead against the doorframe and listened to his children cry, and felt the particular kind of helplessness that came from being the strongest wolf in 3 territories, and still unable to protect the 2 people who needed him most. Ilara Bennett had been in Ashwood Castle for exactly 6 days, and in that time she had learned 3 things. The kitchens were always short-staffed, the pack members spoke to her only when they had to, and the nursery wing, at the far end of the east corridor, was a place no one dared approach. She hadn't asked why. Omegas learned early not to ask too many questions. In her old pack, curiosity had been the first crack that widened into exile, and she had promised herself, walking through Ashwood's gates a week ago, with nothing but a bag of clothes and a letter of passage, that she would keep her head down, and her questions to herself. She was carrying a tray of warm bread to the guards' hall when Edric intercepted her in the corridor, breathless and clearly searching for anyone at all. "You, kitchen girl, can you carry milk?" Ilara blinked at him. "I can carry most things." "Good. Come with me. Quickly." She followed him, without understanding why her stomach tightened with every step closer to the east wing, why the air itself seemed to grow heavier the nearer they came to a plain wooden door flanked by 2 guards, one of whom was pale, as if he had seen something that frightened him badly. And then she heard it. 2 small voices crying, thin and exhausted, the kind of crying that came after a baby had cried so long it had nearly given up on being heard. Something in Ilara's chest twisted painfully. She had grown up the eldest of 5 in a house with too little food and too many mouths, and she knew that particular cry. It was the cry of a child who had been left too long. "Where is their mother?" she asked, before she could stop herself. Edric's face went carefully blank. "Just leave the milk at the door. Don't try to go in." But Alara was no longer looking at him. She was looking past him, at the man standing just beyond the doorway, with his hand pressed white-knuckled against the frame, his eyes closed, his whole body shaking, with some effort she could not name. She recognized him now, though she had never seen him this close. King Draven Ashford, the Alpha of Ashwood, the man whose portrait hung in the great hall, painted before grief had carved new lines into his face. He looked less like a king in that moment, and more like a man drowning in plain sight, and no one around him seemed to know how to pull him out. The crying rose again, more desperate now, and Alara felt her feet moving before she had decided to move them. She set the tray of milk on a side table and walked, unhurried, toward the nursery door. "Wait," Edric hissed. "You can't." She wasn't listening. She had already learned, in 22 years of being overlooked, that sometimes the only way through a door everyone else feared was to walk through it, as though you had never been told to be afraid. She stepped past Draven. She felt him tense beside her, felt something shift in the air, a pressure like the moment before a storm breaks. But she did not stop. She pushed the nursery door open and walked inside. The nursery was dim, lit only by a single lamp turned low, and in twin cradles at the center of the room lay 2 infants, red-faced and furious with the particular fury of babies who had been crying far too long. Alara crossed the room without hesitation and lifted the nearest child, a boy with a shock of dark hair, cradling him against her shoulder and murmuring the same nonsense words she had murmured to her younger siblings 100 times over. Behind her, she heard a sound she would later be unable to fully describe. A low, rolling growl, not quite human, rising from the doorway. She turned her head just enough to see Draven standing frozen at the threshold, his eyes no longer entirely his own. They had shifted to a deep amber gold, sharp and animal, fixed on her with an intensity that should have terrified her. It did not. She did not know why. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or foolishness, or simply that she had spent too many years learning to read danger, and this did not read as danger. Not exactly. It read as fear. Enormous, cornered fear, wearing the shape of a growl because it had no other shape left to wear. "I'm not going to hurt them," she said quietly, keeping her voice as even and unthreatening as she could manage, while the baby in her arms slowly quieted against her shoulder. "I only want to feed them. Look, he's already calmer." The growl did not stop, but it did not grow louder either. Draven's hands were pressed flat against the doorframe now, as if he were physically holding himself back from either advancing or retreating, caught in some silent battle she could not see. The second baby, a girl with the same dark hair as her brother, was still crying in her cradle. Alara shifted the boy to one arm and reached for the girl with the other, humming low under her breath, an old tune her mother used to sing that had no real words, only sound and rhythm. Slowly, impossibly, the growling in the doorway began to fade. She did not look at Draven again. She focused entirely on the twins, on warming milk from the tray she had left just outside, on testing its heat against her wrist, the way she had done for her siblings 1,000 times, on settling into the wooden chair beside the cradles, and feeding first the boy and then the girl, while they blinked up at her with wide, unfocused eyes. It was nearly an hour before both children were fed, changed, and finally asleep, their small chests rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of infants who had, for the first time in longer than anyone wanted to admit, been properly cared for. When Alara finally rose from the chair and turned toward the door, she found Draven still standing there, though the amber had faded from his eyes, leaving them a tired, human brown. He was staring at her the way a man stares at something he cannot quite believe he is seeing. "How?" he said, and stopped, as if the single word had taken all the breath he had. "How what, my king? How did you do that? No one has been able to. Not the healers, not the nurses, not—" His jaw tightened. "Not me." Alara glanced back at the sleeping twins, uncertain how to answer honestly, without overstepping. "I don't know," she admitted. "I only did what needed doing." Something in his expression shifted, guarded and searching at once, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle with pieces he didn't trust. "What's your name?" "Alara. Alara Bennett." "Alara," he repeated, testing the shape of it. "You should go. It's late." She nodded, gathering the empty milk cups onto the tray, and left the way she had come, past the two guards who watched her with open astonishment, down the long corridor toward the kitchens, where her own small, narrow bed waited. She told herself it meant nothing, that she had simply done a kindness any decent person would have done, that tomorrow the guards would forget her name, and she would go back to being the quiet Omega no one spoke to. She was wrong, though she would not understand how wrong until morning. Draven did not sleep that night. He stood outside the nursery door, long after Alara's footsteps had faded down the corridor, listening to the even, peaceful breathing of his children, a sound he had not heard uninterrupted since Seraphine died. Inside him, Cale had gone quiet in a way he had not been quiet in 4 months. Not silent from exhaustion or grief, but from something closer to relief, though relief was not a feeling Draven trusted himself to name yet. He thought of the strange stillness that had come over him when the Omega girl walked past him into the nursery. He had expected his wolf to surge forward, to drive her back the way it had driven back every nurse, every healer, every well-meaning pack member who had tried in 4 long months. Instead, Cale had only watched, tense and wary, as she lifted his son from the cradle, as if she had done it 100 times before. He did not understand it. He was not certain he wanted to understand it, because understanding it would mean admitting that something in him, wolf and man both, had recognized her, had trusted her, in the space of a single crossed threshold, when he had trusted no one in 4 months, not even himself. Down the corridor, Edric shifted uneasily where he stood guard. My king, should I have stopped her? Draven was quiet for a long moment, his eyes still fixed on the closed nursery door, on the silence behind it, that had, for the first time since Seraphine's death, become something gentle, instead of something broken. No, he said finally. Find out where she sleeps. I want to speak with her again tomorrow. He did not explain why. He was not sure he could have, even if Edric had asked. All he knew was that for the first time in 4 months, his children were sleeping peacefully behind a closed door, and the wolf inside his chest, the wolf that had shut out the entire world since the night it lost its mate, had let a stranger walk straight past him, without a single true attempt to stop her. Somewhere beneath the grief, beneath the guilt he carried like a second skin, a small and unfamiliar feeling stirred. It took him most of the night to recognize it for what it was. Hope, quiet, fragile, and entirely unwelcome, but hope all the same. He did not sleep. But for the first time in 4 months, he did not spend the night pacing the corridor in dread of what the silence behind that door might mean. He spent it simply listening to his children breathe, and wondering, against every instinct that told him not to, what it was about one quiet kitchen girl that had reached a part of him nothing else had been able to touch. Morning in the Ashwood kitchens began before the sun rose, and Alara was usually the first through the door, if only because sleep had never come easily to her, in a place that still felt more like a way station than a home. She had barely finished stacking the bread trays when the head cook, a stout woman named Agnes who ran the kitchens with the discipline of a battle commander, appeared beside her, with an expression Alara couldn't quite read. "You're wanted in the East Wing," Agnes said. "Now, leave the bread." Alara's stomach dropped. In her experience, being summoned anywhere by anyone important rarely meant good news for an Omega. "Have I done something wrong?" Agnes studied her for a long moment, and something in her hard expression softened, just slightly. "No, girl, I don't think you have. Go on, the king is waiting." The walk to the East Wing felt longer than it had the night before, though Alara knew it was the same distance. She kept running through the previous evening in her mind, searching for anything she might have done wrong, any rule she might have broken without realizing it. She had walked into the nursery uninvited. She had touched the king's children without permission. Perhaps that alone was enough to end her short time at Ashwood before it had properly begun. When she reached the corridor outside the nursery, she found Draven standing exactly where she had left him, as though he had not moved all night, though the hollows under his eyes suggested he simply hadn't slept. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "You came back," he said finally, as if he had expected her not to. "You sent for me, my king." "I did." He straightened, seeming to gather himself, the exhaustion in his face giving way to something more careful, more deliberate. "Last night, my children slept through the night for the first time since their mother died. Do you understand what that means to me?" Alara shook her head slowly, unsure what answer he wanted. "It means," Draven said, That in 4 months, no one, not my healers, not my own sister, not the finest nursemaids in 3 territories, has been able to do what you did in less than an hour. My wolf would not allow anyone close enough to try. He paused, and something in his voice roughened. He allowed you. I don't know why, Alara admitted honestly. I only wanted to help. I heard them crying, and I couldn't just walk past. That may be exactly why. Draven's gaze was intent now, searching her face as though it held answers he badly needed. I would like you to care for my children, officially. Not as a kitchen girl brought in during an emergency, but as their nurse, with full standing in this household. Alara's breath caught. It was, by any measure, an enormous offer, the kind of position that could change the entire course of her life within the pack. And yet, something in his tone, in the tightness around his eyes, told her this was not a decision he made lightly, or even entirely willingly. Why does that trouble you? She asked before she could stop herself. Forgive me, my king, but you don't look like a man offering good news. A faint, humorless smile crossed his face. You're perceptive. It troubles me, because I don't understand it. My wolf has not trusted anyone since the day my mate died. I do not know why he trusts you, and until I understand it, I cannot be certain the trust will hold. If something changes, if he decides tomorrow that you are a danger after all, I need you to understand what that could mean. You're warning me, Alara said slowly. I'm warning you, he agreed, because I would rather you walk away now, with nothing lost, than accept and be hurt later, by something neither of us can fully control. Alara considered this. She thought of the twins asleep in their cradles, finally peaceful after 4 months of chaos. She thought of her own 6 days in Ashwood, the cold looks from pack members who saw an Omega and decided instantly she was worth nothing. She thought of the particular loneliness of being tolerated rather than wanted, and how the 2 infants last night had not cared at all what rank she carried, only that she was warm and gentle and there. I'll do it, she said. I'm not afraid of your wolf, my king. Something shifted behind his eyes, surprise, and beneath it, something warmer, that he seemed to catch and suppress, almost as quickly as it appeared. You should be, he said quietly. Everyone else is. Maybe that's the problem, Alara said, before she could think better of it. Maybe they're all so afraid of him that no one has ever simply let him see that they mean no harm. Draven was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an expression she couldn't fully place. Then he nodded, once, as though something had been settled between them, that went beyond the simple matter of a nursing position. Agnes will see that your things are moved to the room beside the nursery, he said. The pups wake at dawn. I trust you'll be ready. I will, Alara said, and meant it. Word traveled fast in Ashwood, faster than Alara had anticipated, and by midday the entire pack seemed to know that the quiet kitchen Omega had somehow been given charge of the king's pups, the same pups no healer or nursemaid had been permitted near in 4 months. The reactions she encountered ranged from open curiosity to something closer to suspicion, and by evening she had grown used to the particular weight of being watched. She found the twins easier to manage than the pack's opinion of her. Rowan and Ivy, she learned their names were, given to them by their mother before she died, though Draven rarely spoke Seraphine's name aloud, as if the syllables themselves carried too much weight. The children were healthy, despite the chaos of the past months, though Alara suspected that had more to do with the desperate, patchwork efforts of guards bringing milk to the door than any real system of care. She settled into a routine within days. Mornings began with feeding and washing, gentle songs while she dressed them, quiet hours spent simply holding them near the window so they could see the daylight. Afternoons brought naps, during which she sorted through the nursery's disorganized supplies, and evenings ended with Draven's brief, careful visits, standing just inside the door, watching his children sleep with an expression of such naked longing that Alara sometimes had to look away, feeling as though she had intruded on something too private for her to witness. He never stayed long. He never reached for them, not in those early days, though she noticed the way his hands twitched at his sides every time Ivy stirred, or Rowan made a small sound in his sleep. It took her nearly a week to understand that he was not staying away because he did not want to hold his children. He was staying away because he was afraid of what might happen if his wolf, still raw with grief and guilt, surged forward the moment he did. You could sit, Alara offered one evening. when he had once again positioned himself just inside the doorway rather than approaching the cradles. They won't mind. Neither will he, I think. Draven's jaw tightened. You don't know that. No, she agreed. But I've watched him with me for a week now, and every time I think he's about to become dangerous, he simply watches. He's not what everyone in this pack believes he is. And what does everyone believe? That he's a monster who can't be trusted near his own children. Alara kept her voice gentle, but she did not soften the words themselves. I don't think that's true. I think he's a wolf who lost the one person he trusted most, and now he doesn't know how to trust anyone, including himself. Draven was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on his sleeping children rather than on her. You speak very plainly for someone who's been here less than 2 weeks. I've spent my whole life being told to speak less, Alara said. I decided a while ago that it never did me any good to hold my tongue when something needed saying. A ghost of something that might, in another life, have been amusement crossed his face. That will make you unpopular in a court that survives on careful words. I've never been popular anywhere, Alara admitted. I've learned to live without it. He looked at her then, really looked, in a way that made her suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how quiet the nursery had become around them. Why does an Omega with your skill end up alone, moving from pack to pack? The question caught her off guard, and for a moment she considered deflecting it, the way she had learned to deflect every question about her past. But something about the honesty he had shown her, the raw vulnerability she had witnessed in this room night after night, made her want to answer honestly in return. My old pack decided an Omega who asked too many questions was more trouble than she was worth, she said quietly. I asked why our Alpha was trading grain during a shortage while our own people went hungry. I wasn't wrong to ask, but being right didn't matter. I was cast out within a month. Draven's expression darkened, though not, she realized, at her. That Alpha sounds like a poor excuse for a leader. He wasn't the worst I've heard of, Alara said, just the one who happened to be mine. They stood in silence for a moment, the twins breathing softly in their cradles, the lamp casting warm light across the small room. It was Draven who finally broke the quiet, his voice lower than before. Thank you, he said, for staying, for not being afraid of what everyone else fears. You don't have to thank me, Alara said. I like being here. I like them. She glanced toward the cradles, then back at him. And I don't think I'm afraid of you either, if that's what you're really asking. Something flickered across his face, gone before she could name it, and he stepped back toward the door, as though the moment had grown too large for the room to hold. Good night, Alara. Good night, my king. He left, and she stood alone in the nursery for a long while afterward, listening to the pups breathe, thinking about the way his voice had softened around her name, and wondering, with a mixture of curiosity and caution, what exactly was beginning to grow in the quiet space between a grieving Alpha and the Omega no one else had wanted. 3 days later, the first real trouble arrived. Not in the shape of danger, but in the shape of gossip, which in a pack as tightly bound as Ashwood could prove just as sharp. Alara was crossing the courtyard with a basket of clean linens when she overheard 2 pack women speaking near the well, their voices pitched low but not quite low enough. An Omega, caring for the heirs, one of them said, disbelief thick in her tone. As if she has any right. She's clearly worked some trick on the king's wolf, the other replied. No wolf simply lets a stranger near his pups after everything that happened to the Luna. Something isn't right about it. Alara kept walking, keeping her expression carefully neutral, though the words settled uncomfortably in her chest. She had known, from the moment Draven offered her the position, that not everyone would welcome an Omega stepping into a role of such importance. She had not expected the whispering to sharpen quite so quickly into open suspicion. That evening, as she settled the twins for the night, Agnes appeared at the nursery door, her broad face drawn with concern. You should know what's being said, the older woman told her without preamble. Some believe you've charmed the king somehow, that no natural bond could explain what's happened here. I haven't done anything but care for 2 children who needed caring for, Alara said, more sharply than she intended. I know that, Agnes said, not unkindly. But knowing the truth and stopping gossip are 2 very different battles, girl. Watch yourself. There are those in this pack who would be glad to see an Omega fail, simply to prove a point they've believed all along. Alara thanked her for the warning, though it did little to ease the unease settling in her stomach. She thought of Draven's words from days earlier, his warning that his wolf's trust might not hold, that something could change without warning. She wondered now whether the greater danger might not come from Kale at all, but from a pack unwilling to accept that an Omega could be trusted with something so precious. She looked down at Rowan and Ivy, sleeping peacefully in their cradles, utterly unaware of the whispers gathering like storm clouds beyond the nursery walls, and made a quiet promise to herself. Whatever came next, whatever suspicion or cruelty the pack directed her way, she would not abandon these children the way the world had so often abandoned her. She had found something here worth staying for, and she did not intend to let go of it easily. The training yard fell silent the moment Draven stepped into it, every guard and warrior straightening at once, and Callum, his second-in-command and oldest friend, crossed the packed dirt to meet him, with the particular caution of a man about to say something unwelcome. "You wanted to see me," Draven said. "I did." Callum glanced around at the surrounding guards, then lowered his voice. "Word has reached me from the Northern Watch. Movement along the Voss border. Nothing confirmed yet, but enough scouts have reported unusual patrols that I don't think we can ignore it." Draven's jaw tightened. The Voss pack had been a thorn in Ashwood's side for years. Their alpha, Silas Voss, a man who measured strength only in territory gained and rivals humbled. Since Seraphine's death, Draven knew Ashwood had looked weaker to outside eyes than at any point in his rule. A king distracted by grief, a pack without a Luna to steady it. It was precisely the kind of weakness a man like Silas would be watching for. "How much time do we have?" "Difficult to say. Weeks, perhaps. Possibly less." Callum's expression was grim. "I don't like it, Draven. Not with things as they are here." "Things here are improving," Draven said, though even as he spoke the words, he heard the uncertainty in his own voice. Callum studied him carefully. "The pups are being cared for now, yes. I've heard about the Omega girl. But you know as well as I do that half this pack still doesn't trust her, and a divided pack is an easy target. If Silas senses weakness, internal or otherwise, he will not hesitate to use it." Draven said nothing for a long moment, staring out across the training yard at warriors sparring in pairs, the familiar rhythm of steel and effort that had once felt like solid ground beneath his feet. Since Seraphine's death, so little had felt solid. "Double the eastern patrols," he said finally, "and send word to our allies in the southern valleys. If Silas is testing our borders, I want him to find them stronger than he expects." "And the pups?" Callum asked carefully. "If tensions rise, the nursery becomes a target too, Draven." "You know that." The thought settled like a stone in Draven's chest. "The nursery is guarded day and night. It will continue to be." "Guards can be overwhelmed," Callum said, not unkindly, but with the blunt honesty of a friend who had earned the right to speak plainly. "I'm not trying to frighten you. I'm trying to make certain you're prepared." Draven nodded slowly, though the unease Callum's words had planted did not fade as easily as the conversation itself. He thought of Alara in the nursery, humming softly to Rowan and Ivy, utterly unaware of the shadow gathering at the pack's borders, and felt a fierce, unfamiliar urge to protect not only his children, but the quiet Omega who had somehow, in the space of 2 short weeks, become essential to both of them. Alara noticed the change in the pack almost immediately, though it took her several days to understand its source. Guards who had once patrolled the outer walls at a relaxed pace now moved with visible tension. Meetings behind closed doors grew more frequent, more hushed. Even Agnes, usually unshakable, seemed distracted, snapping at kitchen staff over small mistakes she would normally have overlooked. "Is something wrong?" Alara finally asked her one afternoon, while helping carry supplies from the storeroom. Agnes hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. "There's trouble brewing along the northern border. The Voss pack. They've been circling Ashwood like vultures since the Luna died, waiting for the right moment to test us." Alara's stomach tightened. "Test us how?" "However they think will hurt us most," Agnes said grimly. "A pack without a strong Luna, with an alpha still mourning, looks like an opportunity to men like Silas Voss. Best you keep the pups close, girl, and don't wander the outer halls alone until this settles." The warning stayed with Alara through the rest of the day, coloring even the quiet moments in the nursery with a new undercurrent of unease. She found herself glancing toward the window more often than usual, listening for footsteps in the corridor, holding Rowan and Ivy just a little closer during their afternoon nap. That evening, Draven's visit to the nursery lasted longer than usual. He stood beside the cradles for nearly an hour, watching his children sleep, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight Alara hadn't heard from him before. "I need to ask something of you," he said. "And I need you to understand, I don't ask it lightly. Of course, if anything happens, if the borders are breached or the pack comes under attack, I need to know the pups will be protected. Not just by guards, by someone who will not hesitate, who will not freeze, who understands what's at stake." He met her eyes. "I trust very few people with that responsibility. I trust you." Alara felt the weight of his words settle over her, heavier than she had expected. "I would never let anything happen to them," she said, and meant it with a certainty that surprised even her. "Not while I still have breath in me." Something in his expression eased, just slightly, though the tension in his shoulders remained. "I believe you," he said quietly. "That frightens me more than I expected it to." "Why does it frighten you?" He was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because I have already lost one person I trusted, with everything that mattered to me. I don't know what I would do if I lost another." The words hung in the air between them, more honest than either of them had intended, and Alara found herself stepping closer without entirely deciding to. "You won't lose me," she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere, my king." He looked at her then, with an expression she couldn't quite name, something caught between hope and fear, longing and restraint, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet nursery holding the weight of everything, neither was yet ready to say aloud. It was Ivy who broke the silence, stirring in her cradle with a small, sleepy sound, and the moment dissolved as naturally as it had formed, leaving behind only the faint, unspoken understanding that something had shifted between them, something neither was prepared to name, but neither could quite ignore either. The following week brought the trouble Agnes had warned of, though not in the form anyone expected. It began with a missing shipment, grain and supplies meant for Ashwood's storehouses that never arrived. The merchants who carried them found later along the northern road, shaken but unharmed, claiming they had been turned back by armed riders bearing colors none of them recognized. Draven called a council that evening, gathering his most trusted advisors in the great hall, and though Alara had no formal place at such meetings, Draven surprised everyone, including himself, by requesting her presence. "She spends more time with information about this pack's daily rhythms than half the council," he said, when Callum raised a questioning eyebrow. "And she has better instincts than most. I want her here." Alara sat at the edge of the long table, uncertain of her place among warriors and advisors twice her age, listening, as Callum laid out what little they knew. The interrupted shipment, the unfamiliar riders, the increased patrols along the Voss border that scouts had reported for weeks. "It's a message," Callum said grimly. "Silas wants us to know he can reach us without crossing the border outright. He's testing how we respond." "And how do we respond?" one of the elder advisors asked. "Carefully," Draven said. "We don't give him the confrontation he's hoping for. Not yet. We strengthen our defenses, secure our supply routes, and make certain every part of this pack, especially the nursery, is protected beyond question." Alara listened, absorbing every word, and when the council finally turned to logistics, she found herself speaking before she had fully decided to. "If I may," she said, drawing several surprised glances, "the nursery has only ever been guarded from the corridor. If someone truly wanted to reach the pups, the servants' passage behind the east wall would be a far easier route. It's barely watched at all." Silence fell over the table. Draven's eyes met hers, sharp with sudden attention. "How do you know about that passage?" "I found it my first week here, looking for a shorter route between the kitchens and the nursery," Alara admitted. "I didn't think much of it at the time, but if I found it without trying, I imagine anyone determined enough could find it too." Callum exchanged a look with Draven, something between alarm and grudging respect. "She's right. That passage should have been sealed months ago." "See that it's done tonight," Draven ordered, and then quieter, his eyes still on Alara. "Thank you. I don't think anyone else at this table would have thought of it." The council continued late into the evening, plans forming and reforming around the growing threat at Ashwood's borders, and by the time it finally ended, Ilara felt the exhaustion of the day settle heavily into her bones. But beneath the exhaustion sat something else too, something quieter and more startling. For the first time since arriving at Ashwood, she had been seen not as an Omega tolerated out of necessity, but as someone whose voice mattered, whose instincts were trusted, whose presence in the room made a genuine difference. She walked back to the nursery that night, with Draven beside her, their steps falling into an easy, unspoken rhythm, and when they reached the door, he paused, looking at her with an expression that carried more warmth than caution, for the first time since she had known him. "You continue to surprise me," he said. "Is that a good thing, my king?" A faint, genuine smile touched his face, the first she had seen from him. "It's becoming my favorite thing about my days," he admitted, and then, as though startled by his own honesty, he stepped back, cleared his throat, and bid her good night before she could respond. Ilara stood in the doorway for a long moment after he left, watching his retreating figure disappear down the corridor, and felt something warm and unfamiliar unfurling in her chest, something she was not yet ready to name, but could no longer entirely ignore. Beyond the walls of Ashwood, danger gathered in the shadows of the northern border, but within those walls, something gentler and equally powerful was quietly taking root, and neither Draven nor Ilara yet understood how deeply it would come to matter in the trials still waiting ahead. The servants' passage behind the east wall was sealed within a day, exactly as Draven had ordered, and for nearly 2 weeks afterward, an uneasy calm settled over Ashwood. Patrols continued at their heightened pace, and word from the northern scouts remained cautious but unchanged. No further incidents, no additional signs of Voss riders testing the borders. Slowly, carefully, the pack allowed itself to breathe again. Ilara used the quiet weeks to settle further into her role, and into a rhythm with the twins that felt, more each day, less like a job, and more like something closer to home. Rowan had begun to recognize her voice, turning toward her the moment she entered the room, and Ivy had taken to grasping her finger with a fierce, determined grip whenever Ilara lifted her from the cradle, as though unwilling to let go. Draven's visits to the nursery grew longer and more frequent. What had once been brief, guarded appearances at the doorway became evenings spent sitting beside the cradles, watching his children, with an ease Ilara had not seen in him during her first weeks at Ashwood. He still did not reach for them, not entirely, though she noticed the careful, testing way his hand sometimes hovered near Rowan's small fist before withdrawing, as though he were building towards something he wasn't yet ready to complete. "You could hold him," Ilara said one evening, watching this quiet hesitation play out for perhaps the 5th time. "He wouldn't mind. I don't think your wolf would either, not anymore." Draven's hand stilled. "What if you're wrong? Then I'll be here," Ilara said simply. "And nothing bad will happen, because I won't let it." He looked at her for a long moment, something vulnerable and searching in his expression, and then, slowly, carefully, he reached into the cradle and lifted his son into his arms, for the first time since the night Seraphine died. Ilara watched him carefully, alert to any sign of tension, any flicker of the wildness she had seen in him that first night. But there was none. Draven stood in the center of the nursery holding his son against his chest, and something in his face broke open. Grief and relief tangled together so completely that Ilara had to look away, feeling as though she were witnessing something too private, too raw, for anyone else's eyes. "He's so small," Draven murmured, his voice thick. "I forgot how small he was." "You haven't held him in 4 months, Ilara said gently. "Of course it feels different." Draven looked down at Rowan, who stared up at him with wide, unfocused eyes, utterly unbothered by the weight of the moment his father was carrying. "I was so afraid," he admitted quietly. "Afraid that if I let myself love them the way I loved their mother, I would lose them too. Afraid that loving anything again would only prove how easily I fail the people who depend on me." "You haven't failed them," Ilara said. "You've protected them the only way you knew how, even when it hurt you to do it." "It wasn't protection," Draven said, his voice rougher now. "It was fear, wearing protection's face. There's a difference, and I think some part of me knew it the whole time." He looked up at her, and the raw honesty in his eyes made her breath catch. "You saw that difference before I did." Ilara didn't know how to answer that, so she said nothing, simply reached out and gently touched Ivy's small hand where she lay in her cradle, giving Draven the space to hold his son, without the pressure of a response he clearly hadn't finished forming. They stood together in comfortable silence for a long while, the twins settling peacefully between them, and when Draven finally returned Rowan to his cradle, he lingered longer than usual before leaving, his eyes moving between his sleeping children and the quiet Omega, who had somehow become as essential to this room as the air itself. "Ilara," he said, just before he reached the door. "Yes, my king? Thank you, for not giving up on me, the way everyone else seemed ready to." "No one gave up on you," Ilara said gently. "They were only waiting for you to be ready. I think, perhaps, you needed someone patient enough to wait alongside you." He held her gaze a moment longer, something unspoken passing between them, and then, with visible effort, he stepped back and left the nursery, the door closing softly behind him. Ilara stood alone in the quiet room, her heart beating a little too quickly, and allowed herself, just for a moment, to acknowledge the truth she had been avoiding for days. Whatever was growing between her and Draven Ashford, it was no longer something she could dismiss as simple duty or simple kindness. It had become something far more complicated and far more dangerous to her carefully guarded heart. Not everyone in Ashwood shared Ilara's growing sense of peace. Among the pack's older families, whispers had sharpened into something closer to open resentment, and it reached a breaking point on a bright afternoon when Ilara took the twins for their usual walk through the castle gardens. She had barely settled onto a bench near the fountain, Rowan and Ivy bundled comfortably in her arms, when a woman she recognized as Priscilla, wife of one of the pack's senior elders, approached with two companions trailing behind her, their expressions carrying the particular sharpness of women who had come looking for a confrontation. "It's remarkable," Priscilla said, her voice pitched to Carrie, "how quickly an Omega, with no pack of her own, manages to find her way into the king's most private affairs." Ilara kept her expression carefully neutral, holding the twins a little closer. "I care for the children because they need care, my lady, nothing more." "Nothing more," Priscilla repeated, her tone dripping with disbelief. "And yet the king visits the nursery nightly now, lingers for hours, holds his children for the first time in months, all since your arrival. Forgive me if I find that difficult to believe is simple coincidence." "Whatever you believe," Ilara said, keeping her voice steady, though her pulse had quickened. "I have done nothing but care for these children honestly and well. If that troubles you, I'm sorry, but I won't apologize for it." One of Priscilla's companions, a younger woman with a sharp, unkind smile, stepped closer, and Omega, raising the future heirs of Ashwood. "It's unnatural. Everyone knows Omegas exist to serve, not to rise above their station. You should remember your place before you forget it entirely." Something hot and fierce rose in Ilara's chest, and though she had spent years learning to swallow such moments, to bow her head and let cruelty pass unanswered, she found she no longer had the patience for it. Not here. Not with two children in her arms, who deserved better than the prejudice being spat over their heads. "My station," Ilara said, her voice quiet but unwavering, "has never once stopped these children from crying less, sleeping better, or feeling safe since I arrived. If you believe rank matters more than that, then I think you've forgotten what actually matters in raising a child at all." Priscilla's face flushed with anger, and for a moment, Ilara feared the confrontation might escalate further. But before anyone could speak again, a new voice cut through the garden, calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Is there a problem here?" Draven stood at the garden's edge, having arrived unnoticed during the exchange, his expression carefully controlled in a way that nonetheless carried an unmistakable edge of warning. Priscilla's demeanor shifted instantly, deference replacing hostility. "No problem at all, my king. We were simply discussing the unusual arrangements in the nursery." "The arrangement," Draven said evenly, "was made by me, for reasons I do not owe explanation to anyone in this garden. Ilara has done more for my children in a matter of weeks than this entire pack managed in 4 months of grief. I would think that alone would earn her respect, rather than suspicion." Priscilla's mouth tightened, but she said nothing further, offering a stiff bow before retreating with her companions, their whispered conversation resuming the moment they believed themselves out of earshot. Draven crossed to the bench, his eyes moving over Ilara with visible concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm used to it," Ilara said, though her voice carried more weariness than she intended. "It's not the first time I've been told an Omega has no right to matter." Something flashed across Draven's face, anger held carefully in check. "You matter," he said firmly. "Whatever this pack believes, whatever they whisper behind closed doors, you have earned every bit of trust I've placed in you, and more besides." Elara looked up at him, moved more than she expected by the fierce certainty in his voice. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." He sat down beside her on the bench, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and reached out to gently touch Ivy's small hand where she slept against Elara's chest. For a long moment, they simply sat together in the afternoon sun, the whispers of the garden fading behind them. And Elara found herself thinking, with a mixture of hope and quiet fear, that whatever the pack believed about her place at Ashwood, something real and undeniable had begun growing between herself and the grieving king beside her. Something that neither prejudice nor gossip seemed likely to uproot, no matter how hard the pack tried. Autumn settled over Ashwood with a chill that crept into the stone corridors, and with it came a rhythm that Elara had come to treasure more than she ever expected to treasure anything. Mornings with the twins had become effortless, familiar in the way only deep routine could make them. Rowan had begun to babble, small nonsense sounds that made Draven laugh in a way Elara suspected he hadn't laughed in years, and Ivy had discovered she could pull herself upright against the edge of her cradle, a small triumph that filled the nursery with delighted celebration each time she managed it. Draven's evenings in the nursery had become a fixture neither of them acknowledged aloud, but both quietly relied upon. He arrived most nights just after supper, sometimes lingering for an hour, sometimes staying until the twins had long fallen asleep, and only the two of them remained, talking quietly in the lamplight, about matters both trivial and significant. It was during one of these evenings that Elara first noticed the shift in the way he watched her, no longer simply the cautious attention of a father grateful for his children's care, but something warmer, something that lingered a beat too long whenever their eyes met. "You're staring," she said one evening, not quite able to keep the smile from her voice, as she settled Ivy back into her cradle. "Am I not allowed to?" Draven asked, and there was an unfamiliar lightness in his tone, something almost playful that she had never heard from him before. "I didn't say that," Elara replied, feeling warmth rise in her cheeks despite herself. "I only noticed." "Then I suppose I should stop apologizing for it," he said, and the small, genuine smile that followed made her heart stumble, in a way she hadn't expected. They had grown close over the past weeks, in ways that went beyond the careful boundaries of king and nursemaid. Draven had begun sharing pieces of himself she suspected few others in the pack ever saw. Memories of his childhood before the weight of leadership settled onto his shoulders, quiet admissions about the fear that gripped him each time he thought of the responsibilities still ahead, the northern border, the ever-present threat of the Voss pack, the enormous task of raising two children who would one day need to lead this pack themselves. In turn, Elara found herself speaking more openly than she had with anyone in years, about her childhood, about the particular loneliness of growing up in Omega, in a world quick to dismiss her worth, about the fear of never truly belonging anywhere, that had followed her from pack to pack until she arrived, uncertain and unwanted, at Ashwood's gates. "You belong here," Draven said quietly, after she had finished one such admission, his voice carrying a certainty that startled her with its weight. "Whatever this pack believes, whatever cruelty they've shown you, you belong here, more than most people who were born into it." "You don't know that," Elara said softly, though something in her chest ached at the kindness of the words. "I do," Draven said. "I've watched you these past weeks. I've seen how patient you are with my children, how fiercely you defend them, how honestly you speak, even when honesty costs you comfort. I have not met many people, in this pack or any other, who carry themselves with the kind of quiet strength you carry every single day." Elara looked away, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice, uncertain how to hold the warmth blooming in her chest, without it spilling into something she wasn't ready to name. "You make it sound simple," she murmured, "belonging, as though it's something I could simply decide to have." "Perhaps it is that simple," Draven said, moving closer, close enough now that she could feel the warmth of him beside her in the dim nursery light. "Perhaps the only thing standing between you and belonging here is your own certainty that you don't deserve it." She looked up at him then, and the air between them grew charged with something neither of them had spoken aloud, something that had been building quietly for weeks, in stolen glances and lingering conversations, and the easy comfort that had grown between them despite every reason it shouldn't have. "Draven," she said softly, using his name without title for the first time. Something shifted in his expression at the sound of it, raw and unguarded. "Say it again," he murmured. "Draven," she repeated, and watched as his eyes darkened, watched as he leaned closer, close enough that she could feel his breath against her cheek, close enough that every instinct in her urged her to close the remaining distance between them. A soft cry from Ivy's cradle broke the moment entirely, and they both startled back, the spell shattering as quickly as it had formed. Draven cleared his throat, stepping back with visible effort, though the warmth in his eyes remained even as the moment passed. "I should let you settle her," he said, his voice rougher than before. "You should," Elara agreed, though neither of them moved for a long moment, caught in the lingering pull of what had almost happened between them. He left shortly after, and Elara spent the rest of the evening settling Ivy back to sleep, with hands that trembled slightly, her mind replaying the near kiss over and over, uncertain whether to feel relieved or disappointed that Ivy's cry had interrupted it. The following days carried a new tension between them, not unpleasant, but charged with the particular awareness of two people who had come dangerously close to admitting something neither was certain they were ready to say aloud. Draven's visits continued, but they carried a different quality now, longer silences filled with meaning, glances that lingered a beat too long, small touches, a hand brushing hers as they both reached for the same blanket that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. It was Callum who finally addressed what half the pack had already begun to whisper about, cornering Draven in the training yard one afternoon, with the particular bluntness only decades of friendship could earn. "You're falling for her," Callum said, without preamble. "The Omega, Elara." Draven didn't bother denying it, though the admission clearly cost him something. "I don't know what I'm doing, Callum. I only know that for the first time since Seraphine died, I feel something other than grief and fear. I don't know what to make of that." "Make of it what it is," Callum said, more gently than his usual tone allowed. "You've been drowning for 4 months, Draven. If she's the one pulling you back to the surface, I don't see why that should trouble you as much as it clearly does." "Because loving someone means risking losing them," Draven said, his voice quiet but raw. "I already lost Seraphine, because I trusted the wrong information, made the wrong decision. What happens if I fail Elara the same way? What happens to my children if history repeats itself?" Callum studied his friend for a long moment, understanding settling into his expression. You can't lead a pack, or raise children, or live any kind of life at all, by refusing every chance at happiness out of fear it might one day be taken from you. Seraphine wouldn't have wanted that for you. I knew her well enough to know that much. Draven said nothing, but the words settled deep, turning over in his mind long after Callum had returned to his duties. He thought of Elara in the nursery, patient and fierce and unshaken by every cruelty the pack had thrown her way. He thought of the warmth in her eyes when she looked at his children, the warmth that had, somewhere in the past weeks, begun extending toward him as well. He thought of the moment in the nursery 2 nights ago, the way his heart had pounded as he leaned toward her, the way every instinct in him, wolf and man both, had wanted nothing more than to close that final distance between them. Perhaps Callum was right. Perhaps continuing to guard himself against every possibility of loss was its own kind of failure, a slower, quieter one than the failure that had cost him Seraphine, but a failure all the same, one that would cost him not his mate's life, but his own chance at a future worth living. That evening, he made his way to the nursery with a new resolve settling into his chest, uncertain exactly what he intended to say, but certain, for the first time in months, that he no longer wanted to keep his heart locked away out of fear. He found Elara sitting beside the cradles, humming softly to Ivy, the lamplight casting gentle shadows across her face, and something in his chest tightened with a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to name until this very moment. "Elara," he said quietly, and she looked up, something hopeful flickering in her eyes, at the sound of her name spoken so gently. "Yes?" He crossed the room slowly, closing the distance between them, with a deliberateness that made her breath catch, and knelt beside her chair, so that their eyes met evenly. "I've spent 4 months believing that loving anything again would only prove how easily I fail the people who matter most to me," he said softly. "But I don't believe that anymore. Not since you walked into this nursery and refused to be afraid of what everyone else feared." Elara's eyes glistened, though she said nothing, simply waited, her heart pounding as he continued. I don't know what this is between us, Draven admitted, but I know I don't want to keep pretending it isn't there. I know I don't want to lose the chance to find out what it could become, out of fear alone. Neither do I, Elara whispered, and the words hung between them, fragile and honest, and entirely true. This time, when he leaned forward, there was no interruption, no cry from the cradles to shatter the moment. Their lips met softly, tentatively at first, and then with growing certainty, and somewhere in the quiet warmth of that small nursery, surrounded by two sleeping children who had brought them together in the first place, something long buried in both of them, finally, carefully, began to heal. News of the kiss, shared in the nursery, never left that room, but something had shifted between Draven and Elara that no amount of discretion could fully hide. The pack noticed it in small things, the way Draven's shoulders had eased in recent weeks, the way laughter had returned to the great hall for the first time since Seraphine's death, the unmistakable warmth that passed between the king and his children's nurse whenever their paths crossed in the castle's halls. For most of the pack, this change was welcome. Ashwood had suffered under the weight of its king's grief for 4 long months, and a happier, steadier alpha meant a stronger, steadier pack. But for a small, determined faction of pack elders, led quietly by Priscilla and her husband, the change was cause for alarm rather than celebration. An Omega cannot become Luna, Priscilla insisted, at a private gathering of like-minded elders, her voice sharp with conviction. It has never happened in Ashwood's history, not in 300 years of tradition. If Draven means to elevate her, he risks the pack's very structure, the respect our hierarchy has always commanded. The king seems happy, one of the younger elders ventured cautiously, happier than he's been since the Luna died. Surely that counts for something. Happiness is not leadership, Priscilla snapped. An alpha's choices affect the entire pack, not merely his own heart. If he elevates an Omega to Luna, what message does that send to every pack that has ever looked to Ashwood as an example of proper order? We would become a laughingstock among our allies. The conversation continued late into the evening, plans forming among the discontented elders, though none among them yet dared bring their concerns directly to Draven. Instead, they began a quieter campaign, planting doubt among the pack's ranks, whispering concerns about the wisdom of an alpha's judgment when clouded by grief and sudden infatuation, questioning whether Elara's rapid rise within the household spoke to genuine ability or simply to some manipulation none among them could quite name, but all seemed eager to suspect. Elara felt the shift in atmosphere long before anyone spoke directly of its cause. Pack members who had grown accustomed to her presence over recent weeks now regarded her with renewed suspicion. Servants who had softened toward her returned to cold, clipped interactions. Even Agnes, usually a steady source of support, seemed distracted and troubled whenever Elara's name came up in conversation among the kitchen staff. "What's happened?" Elara finally asked her, cornering the older woman in the kitchen storeroom one afternoon. "Everyone's treating me as though I've done something terrible, and I don't understand what's changed." Agnes sighed heavily, setting down the sack of flour she'd been carrying. "There's talk, girl, about you and the king, about what it might mean if things between you continue to grow the way they seem to be growing." "What kind of talk?" "The kind that worries about tradition more than happiness," Agnes said carefully. "Some among the elders believe an Omega has no place becoming Luna, whatever her merits, whatever good she's done for this pack. They're afraid of what it might mean for Ashwood standing among the other packs." Elara felt something cold settle in her stomach, though it wasn't entirely surprise. She had known, from the very beginning, that her rank would follow her like a shadow no matter how much good she managed to do. "I never asked to become Luna," she said quietly. "I only wanted to care for the children." "I know that," Agnes said gently. "But feelings rarely stay contained to their original intentions, do they? And the king's feelings for you are hardly a secret anymore, whatever discretion the two of you have tried to maintain." Elara returned to the nursery that evening, carrying the weight of the conversation heavily in her chest, and Draven noticed immediately, his brow furrowing with concern the moment he arrived. "What's wrong?" he asked, crossing the room to her side. She hesitated, uncertain whether to burden him with the pack's growing discontent, but the openness that had grown between them in recent weeks pushed her toward honesty rather than silence. "There are elders who believe I shouldn't be here," she admitted. "Not in this role," and certainly not in whatever role you might imagine for me beyond it. They worry what it means for Ashwood's standing, if an Omega becomes Luna. Draven's expression darkened, though his voice remained carefully measured. Ashwood's standing has never depended on rigid tradition alone. It depends on strength, on wisdom, on the well-being of its pack. You have given more to this pack in a few short months than some of these elders have contributed in years. They don't see it that way, Ilara said softly, and I understand their fear, even if I don't agree with it. Change is frightening, especially for those who've built their entire understanding of the world around things staying exactly as they've always been. Their fear doesn't give them the right to determine my heart, Draven said firmly, taking her hands in his. Or yours. Whatever they believe about tradition, I will not let it dictate who I choose to love, or who I choose to trust with my children's future. Ilara's breath caught at the word love, spoken so plainly, so certainly, and she looked up at him with an expression caught between hope and lingering fear. Draven, if this causes real division in your pack, if it weakens Ashwood at a time when the Voss threat still looms at our borders, I couldn't bear knowing I was the cause of it. You would not be the cause of it, Draven said. Prejudice would be the cause of it, narrow thinking that refuses to see worth beyond rank. I will not ask you to shrink yourself to make small minds comfortable, Ilara. Not now, not ever. She leaned into him, comforted by the certainty in his voice, even as worry continued to gnaw at the edges of her thoughts. And for a long moment, they simply held each other in the quiet nursery, drawing strength from the warmth that had grown so naturally between them. The confrontation Ilara had feared arrived sooner than expected, and in a form far more painful than mere gossip. It came during a formal gathering held to celebrate the twins' upcoming half-year, an occasion the entire pack had been invited to attend, filling the great hall with warmth and celebration that felt, for the first time in months, almost entirely free of the grief that had haunted Ashwood since Seraphine's death. Ilara stood near the edge of the hall, Ivy settled comfortably against her shoulder, watching Draven greet pack members, with Rowan held proudly in his arms, when Priscilla's husband, a stern elder named Cedric, approached with several other elders trailing behind him, their expressions carrying the weight of a confrontation long planned. My king, Cedric began, his tone respectful but firm. The elders of this pack have gathered to raise a concern we believe cannot wait any longer. Draven's expression grew guarded, though he kept his voice even. Speak your concern, Cedric. It has become clear to all of us, Cedric continued, that your affection for the children's nurse has grown beyond simple gratitude. We understand the comfort she has brought you and your children during a difficult time. But we cannot, in good conscience, remain silent while the possibility of an Omega rising to Luna threatens 3 centuries of Ashwood tradition. A hush fell over the great hall, every eye turning toward the small group gathered near its center. Ilara felt her face flush with heat, humiliation and anger tangling together, as the entire pack watched her worth debated, as though she weren't standing right there, holding the king's daughter against her chest. Tradition, Draven said slowly, has never once fed my children when they cried through the night. Tradition did not calm my wolf when every healer and nursemaid in this pack failed to reach him. Tradition did not stand between my children and danger, or speak honestly when honesty was needed, or earn the trust of a wolf that trusted no one for 4 long months. Ilara did all of that. We do not dispute her merits, Cedric said carefully, only her rank, and what it might mean for the pack's standing if she were to rise beyond what tradition allows. Then perhaps, Draven said, his voice hardening with an authority that silenced the murmuring crowd. It is tradition that needs to change, rather than the woman who has done more for this pack's future than any rule written 3 centuries ago could have predicted. The hall fell utterly silent, the weight of his words settling over pack and elders alike. Ilara felt tears gathering behind her eyes, moved beyond words by the fierce certainty in his voice, by the way he had chosen, without hesitation, to defend her in front of the entire pack, rather than bow to pressure meant to diminish her. Cedric's jaw tightened, clearly unwilling to concede but equally unwilling to challenge his king further in front of so many witnesses. He offered a stiff bow and retreated, his fellow elders following close behind, though the tension in the hall lingered long after they had gone. Draven crossed to Ilara's side, gently touching her arm. Are you all right? I've faced worse, Ilara said quietly, though her voice trembled slightly. But thank you. for not letting them diminish me, even when it would have been easier to stay silent. I will never stay silent when it comes to protecting you, Draven said softly, his eyes holding hers with unwavering warmth. Whatever tradition demands, whatever the elders fear, I know what I've found in you, and I refuse to let anyone convince me it isn't worth defending. Around them, the celebration slowly resumed, pack members offering cautious smiles and careful words of encouragement, the tension of the confrontation gradually easing into something closer to acceptance. But Alara knew, even as the evening carried on, that the elders' resistance had not truly ended, only retreated, waiting for a better moment to resurface. She held Ivy a little closer, watching Draven laugh gently at something Rowan had done, and allowed herself, despite the lingering unease, to feel something she had rarely allowed herself to feel in her life. Hope that, whatever challenges still waited ahead, she had finally found a place, and a person, worth fighting to keep. Winter arrived early that year, frost creeping across Ashwood's stone walls, and with it came a stretch of quiet that felt, for the first time in months, genuinely peaceful. The elders' resistance had not entirely faded, but Draven's firm defense at the twins' celebration had silenced the most open forms of dissent, leaving only quiet murmurs that no longer carried the same threatening weight. Alara found herself, in these quiet weeks, growing more certain of her place at Ashwood than she had ever been of anything in her life. The twins thrived under her care, Rowan taking his first wobbling steps one bright afternoon, Ivy babbling what Alara swore, with growing confidence, sounded almost like actual words. Draven's visits to the nursery had become a fixture of nearly every evening, and more than once, Alara had woken in the small hours to find him asleep in the chair beside the cradles, having stayed far longer than either of them intended, unwilling to leave the peace he'd found there. It was during one such evening, the twins long asleep and the nursery quiet around them, that Draven finally spoke the words that had clearly been building in him for weeks. "I want to tell you something," he said, his voice carrying a rare vulnerability. "About Seraphine, about what happened." Alara set down the small blanket she'd been folding, giving him her full attention. "You don't have to, if it's too difficult." "I want to," Draven said. "I think I need to, actually. You've given so much of yourself to me and my children, without ever asking for anything in return. I want you to understand fully what you've helped heal." Alara nodded gently, settling into the chair across from him, and Draven began to speak, his voice low and measured, carrying the particular carefulness of a story rehearsed silently many times but never before spoken aloud. "There were warning signs before the ambush that took her," he said. "Reports of unusual movement near the eastern border. Nothing confirmed. Nothing that seemed urgent at the time. I dismissed them. I was focused on trade negotiations with the southern packs, convinced the border patrols were sufficient. Seraphine disagreed. She wanted to increase our presence there, but I overruled her, told her the reports were likely exaggerated, that our resources were better spent elsewhere." His hands tightened where they rested on his knees, old grief resurfacing with visible effort. "She went to the border herself, 3 days later, to assess the situation firsthand, the way she always did when something troubled her instincts. I let her go. I thought it was simple caution, nothing more. I didn't know it would be the last time I saw her alive." Alara reached across the space between them and took his hand, saying nothing, simply offering the quiet comfort of her presence as he continued. "The ambush came from riders we later confirmed were sent by Silas Voss, testing our defenses in exactly the way Seraphine had feared. She fought bravely. The guards who survived told me she held off 6 attackers alone before reinforcements arrived, long enough to save every guard in her party, but not long enough to save herself." His voice broke slightly on the final words, and Alara tightened her grip on his hand. "I've carried the weight of that decision every single day since. If I had listened to her instincts, instead of my own convenience, she would still be here. My children would have their mother. And I wouldn't have spent 4 months so consumed by guilt that I nearly lost myself entirely, and very nearly lost my own children in the process." "You didn't lose them," Alara said softly. "You protected them the only way your grief allowed, even when it hurt you. And you found your way back to them, Draven. That matters more than the mistake that came before it." "It matters because of you," Draven said, looking up at her with raw honesty in his eyes. "I don't know if I would have found my way back without you walking into that nursery, and refusing to be afraid of what I'd become. Alara felt tears gathering in her own eyes now, moved deeply by the trust he had placed in her, by the willingness to share something so painful, so private, after months of carrying it entirely alone. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trusting me with this." "I trust you with everything," Draven said simply. "My children, my pack's future, my own heart, however unsteady it's been these past months." He reached up, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "I love you, Alara. I don't think I've said it plainly until now, but I need you to know it clearly. Whatever the elders believe, whatever tradition demands, I love you, and I don't intend to let fear or prejudice stand between us any longer." The words settled over Alara like warmth spreading through cold hands, and she found herself smiling through her tears, overwhelmed by a happiness she had never quite believed herself capable of holding. "I love you too," she said softly. "I think I have for longer than I've let myself admit." They sat together in comfortable silence after that, hands intertwined, the weight of old grief easing into something gentler, something that felt, for the first time since Seraphine's death, genuinely like healing rather than mere survival. The peace of that winter did not last uninterrupted, though the trouble that arrived came not from the northern border, but from within Ashwood itself, in a form neither Draven nor Alara had anticipated. It began with Kale. For weeks, Draven's wolf had remained calm, settled in a way he had not been since Seraphine's death, but one evening, as Draven made his way toward the nursery, he felt an unfamiliar restlessness rising within him, sharp and sudden, without any clear cause. He reached the nursery door to find Alara standing beside the cradles, her expression tense, and immediately understood something had happened. "What's wrong?" "Rowan has a fever," Alara said, her voice carrying barely restrained worry. "It came on suddenly, within the last hour. I've sent for the healer, but—" Before she could finish, Draven felt Kale surge forward, with an intensity he hadn't experienced in months. Old fear and protectiveness, colliding violently, at the thought of his son in danger. He gripped the doorframe, fighting to keep control, his vision sharpening at the edges with the particular clarity that came just before a shift. "Draven." Alara's voice cut through the rising tide of panic, calm and grounding. "Look at me. Rowan needs you steady, not consumed by fear. I need you here, with us, not lost to your wolf's panic." Her words reached him in a way little else could have, and with visible effort, he forced himself back from the edge, focusing on her voice, on the steady certainty in her eyes, until the sharp edges of his vision softened, and Kale's restless surge began, slowly, to ease. "Good," Alara said softly, relief evident in her voice. "Now come. He needs his father close, not standing frozen in the doorway." Draven crossed the room and knelt beside the cradle, gently touching Rowan's small, overheated forehead. Fear and love tangled together, in a way that no longer threatened to overwhelm him entirely. The healer arrived shortly after, confirming what Alara had already suspected: a common childhood fever, uncomfortable but not dangerous, requiring only rest and careful monitoring through the night. They sat together beside Rowan's cradle for hours afterward, taking turns cooling his small forehead with damp cloths, murmuring soft reassurances even as he slept, and by dawn, his fever had broken entirely, leaving behind only the exhausted relief of two parents, bound not by blood alone, but by every sleepless hour spent caring for a child they both loved fiercely. "You kept me steady," Draven said quietly, as morning light began filtering through the nursery windows. "When Kale tried to take over, when fear nearly consumed me entirely, your voice was the only thing that reached me." "That's what love does," Alara said softly, exhaustion and tenderness mingling in her tired smile. "It gives you something steady to hold on to, even when everything else feels like it's spinning out of control." Draven reached for her hand, holding it gently, as they both watched Rowan sleep peacefully, his fever fully broken, and felt, despite the exhausting night behind them, a profound and settled certainty that whatever challenges still waited ahead, he no longer faced them alone. He had Alara now, steady and fierce and endlessly patient, and for the first time since Seraphine's death, that certainty felt like more than enough to carry him through whatever came next. The relative peace of winter shattered on a night no one at Ashwood had anticipated, though in hindsight, Callum would later admit The signs had been building for weeks, small and easy to dismiss individually, but forming, together, a pattern they should have recognized sooner. It began with the northern watchtower going silent, a routine check-in, expected every few hours through the night, simply never arrived. Callum sent riders to investigate, and when they returned before midnight, their faces pale and urgent, the news they carried sent the entire castle into motion. "The watchtower has been overrun," Callum reported to Draven, who had been roused from the nursery, where he'd fallen asleep beside Alara, after another long evening with the twins. "Voss riders, at least 24 by the tracks we found. They're moving fast. And from the direction, my king, I believe they're heading straight for the castle." Draven's blood ran cold. "How much time do we have?" "Less than an hour, if their pace holds." The castle erupted into controlled chaos. Guards rousing from their quarters, warriors gathering weapons, the entire pack mobilizing with the speed of long-practiced emergency drills. Draven's mind raced through a dozen calculations at once: defense positions, evacuation routes, the safety of his pack. But beneath all of it sat one thought, sharp and consuming above everything else: his children. He returned to the nursery to find Alara already awake, alerted by the sudden commotion echoing through the halls, her expression tense but remarkably composed, as she gathered the twins from their cradles. "How bad is it?" she asked, though her steady hands never paused in wrapping Ivy securely against the night's chill. "Voss riders, moving toward the castle. We have less than an hour to prepare." Draven crossed to her side, helping secure Rowan against her other arm. "I need you to take them to the lower cellars. There's a hidden passage there that leads beyond the outer walls, a route only the royal family and a handful of trusted guards know exists. Callum will meet you with an escort." "And you?" Alara asked, though she already knew the answer, could see it in the hard set of his jaw. "I have to defend this pack," Draven said. "Ashwood cannot fall to Silas Voss, not while I still draw breath to prevent it." Fear flashed across Alara's face, quickly suppressed beneath the same fierce composure that had carried her through every trial since her arrival at Ashwood. "Then I need you to come back," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor beneath it. "Whatever happens tonight, Draven, you come back to us." He pulled her close for a brief, fierce embrace, careful not to disturb the twins held between them. "I intend to," he said against her hair. "Nothing in this world could keep me from returning to you three." They parted with visible reluctance, and Alara hurried toward the lower cellars, with the twins secured against her, Callum's chosen guards falling into formation around her as they moved through the castle's shadowed corridors. Behind her, she could hear the mounting sounds of preparation, warriors gathering in the courtyard, the heavy grind of the main gate's defensive mechanisms being armed, the low, urgent voice of Draven issuing final commands before the coming battle. The hidden passage was narrow and cold, carved through solid stone generations ago for precisely this purpose, and Alara moved through it with careful urgency, Rowan and Ivy remarkably calm against her despite the tension radiating through everyone around them, as though even the youngest members of Ashwood understood, on some instinctive level, the gravity of the night unfolding above them. They emerged nearly a quarter-mile beyond the outer walls, into a small clearing hidden by dense trees, where Callum had arranged for a secondary group of guards to await their arrival, ready to move Alara and the twins further still, if the battle turned against Ashwood's defenders. From this distance, Alara could see the castle's silhouette against the night sky, torches flaring to life along its walls, the distant sound of horns calling warriors to their positions. Somewhere within those walls, Draven stood ready to defend everything he had rebuilt in the months since Seraphine's death, everything Alara herself had helped him rebuild, and the thought of losing him now, after everything they had overcome together, settled like ice through her veins. "We should move further back," one of the guards urged gently. "It isn't safe here, even at this distance." Alara nodded, though her eyes remained fixed on the distant castle for one final moment, silently willing Draven's safety, with every fiber of her being, before allowing the guards to guide her deeper into the concealing darkness of the forest. The battle for Ashwood's walls raged for nearly 2 hours, brutal and desperate, Voss riders pressing hard against defenses that held, again and again, through sheer determination and the fierce leadership of a king, fighting not merely for territory, but for the family waiting safely beyond the walls. Draven fought at the front of his warriors, Kale fully present within him now, Not the wild, grief-stricken creature of the past months, but focused and lethal, channeling months of buried fear and protectiveness into a strength that drove back wave after wave of attacking riders. Callum fought at his side, the two of them moving with the practiced coordination of decades of friendship, holding the main gate long enough for reinforcements from the southern valleys, alerted days earlier by Draven's cautious preparations, to arrive and turn the tide decisively in Ashwood's favor. By the time dawn began breaking over the eastern hills, the Voss riders had retreated, leaving behind a battlefield scarred, but ultimately triumphant, for Ashwood's defenders. Draven stood amid the aftermath, exhausted and bloodied but alive, and felt the fierce relief of victory tempered immediately by an overwhelming need to reach the family he had sent into hiding hours before. He found them still within the forest clearing. Ilara, pale with worry, but the twins safely settled and, remarkably, asleep despite the night's chaos. The moment she saw him emerging from the tree line, exhaustion and relief crashing visibly over her features, Ilara rushed forward, careful not to jostle the sleeping children, and Draven pulled her close with his one free arm, holding her as tightly as their circumstances allowed. "You came back," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I told you I would," Draven murmured against her hair. "Nothing could have kept me from you three. Nothing." They stood together in the pale morning light for a long moment, the weight of the night's danger slowly easing into relieved exhaustion, and when they finally made their way back toward the castle, walking side by side with the twins secure between them, Ilara felt something settle firmly into place within her heart, a certainty that had been building for months, but crystallized fully in that single, terrifying night. Whatever challenges still waited for Ashwood, whatever threats still lingered beyond its borders, she was exactly where she belonged, beside a king who had fought fiercely to protect the family they had built together, and she intended to spend the rest of her life standing just as fiercely beside him in return. In the days that followed the attack, word spread quickly through Ashwood of Ilara's calm composure during the crisis, her steady care of the twins, even as danger loomed at the castle's gates, and something shifted, finally and completely, in the pack's perception of her. Even Priscilla, upon hearing the full account of the night's events, offered a grudging, if stilted, acknowledgement of Ilara's contribution to the pack's survival. But it was Draven's own account, delivered before the full pack council 2 days after the battle, that settled the matter beyond any further dispute. "Ilara Bennett protected my children with the same fierce courage our warriors showed defending these walls," he told the assembled elders, his voice carrying the full authority of a king who had fought and bled for his pack's survival just days before. "She has proven, beyond any doubt, that her worth to this pack has nothing to do with the rank she was born into, and everything to do with the strength of her heart and the sharpness of her mind. I will not hear further debate on her place among us." No one, not even Cedric, dared raise objection in the face of such certainty, and slowly, in the weeks that followed, the last remaining resistance to Ilara's presence at Ashwood began, finally, to fade entirely, replaced by something closer to genuine respect, and in many corners of the pack, something approaching gratitude. For Ilara, the acceptance mattered less than the quiet, steady life she had built at Ashwood, the twins thriving under her care, Draven's love a constant, grounding presence in her days. But she recognized, too, the significance of what had shifted, the beginning of change within a pack that had, for centuries, measured worth by birth rather than character. And though she did not yet know what the future held, standing beside Draven in the aftermath of the battle that had tested them both so completely, she felt, for the first time in her entire life, the unmistakable certainty of having found exactly where she belonged. Spring returned to Ashwood slowly, the frost retreating from its stone walls, and with it came a season of healing that touched every corner of the pack. The twins had grown remarkably in the months since the battle, Rowan now confidently toddling through the nursery on unsteady legs, Ivy chattering constantly in the half-formed words of a child eager to be understood, and Draven found himself, more days than not, marveling at how completely his family had transformed from the broken, grief-stricken household it had been less than a year before. Much of that transformation, he knew without doubt, traced directly back to the quiet Omega who had walked past his frozen wolf into a nursery no one else had dared enter, and who had, in the months since, become as essential to his life as breathing itself. He found her one afternoon in the castle gardens, The same gardens where Priscilla had once confronted her so cruelly, sitting on a bench with ivy in her lap, teaching the little girl the names of the flowers blooming around them, with the same patient warmth she brought to everything she touched. Draven paused at the garden's edge for a long moment, simply watching, allowing himself to fully appreciate the peace that had settled so completely into his life since her arrival. "You're staring again," Elara said, without looking up, a smile evident in her voice. "I never claimed to have stopped," Draven replied, crossing to join her on the bench, Rowan trailing behind him at his own careful, determined pace. "I don't think I ever will." Elara looked up at him then, warmth and happiness evident in her expression, and Draven felt his heart settle into the particular certainty that had been building within him for weeks, a decision he had turned over carefully in his mind, until it had become as solid and unshakable as the stone walls surrounding them. "Elara," he said, and something in his tone made her still, sensing the weight behind the single word. "I've spent the past year learning something I didn't fully understand before you came into my life. I learned that love isn't a weakness that grief can exploit, but a strength that carries you through even the darkest moments, if you're brave enough to accept it." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small, carefully wrapped bundle, and Elara's breath caught as he opened it, to reveal a delicate silver ring, simple but beautifully crafted, catching the afternoon light with a quiet elegance that matched the woman he intended to offer it to. "I have loved you for longer than I properly admitted, even to myself," Draven continued, his voice steady, despite the emotion evident beneath it. "You walked into my life when I had nothing left to offer anyone, and you gave me back my children, my strength, and eventually, my heart. I don't want to spend another day without you as my true partner in every sense, not merely in caring for our children, but in leading this pack, in building whatever future still waits for us." Elara's eyes filled with tears, Ivy watching curiously from her lap, sensing the significance of the moment without fully understanding it. "Draven, are you asking?" "I am," he said, kneeling before her despite the awkwardness of the garden bench between them, Rowan tugging curiously at his sleeve. "Elara Bennett, will you become my Luna? Will you stand beside me, not merely as the woman who healed my wolf and my heart, but as my true and equal partner for the rest of our lives?" For a long moment, Elara could only stare at him, overwhelmed by happiness too large for words, and then she was laughing and crying simultaneously, nodding fiercely, even as she struggled to form the actual words of her answer. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, of course, yes." Draven rose and pulled her into his arms, careful of the children caught between them, and the small family embraced together in the spring sunlight, the garden around them blooming with the same quiet renewal that had, over the past year, transformed every corner of Draven's life. News of the engagement spread through Ashwood within hours, and unlike the resistance that had once greeted Elara's rising place within the pack, the response this time carried an outpouring of genuine celebration. The pack had watched, over the past year, as their king transformed from a man drowning in grief into a leader once again capable of steady, confident rule, and they understood, even those who had once doubted, precisely how much of that transformation owed itself to the quiet strength of the Omega, who had refused to be turned away by tradition or prejudice. Even Cedric, upon hearing the news, offered a formal, if somewhat stiff, acknowledgement of the engagement's wisdom, admitting privately to Callum that whatever his earlier concerns about tradition, he could no longer deny that Elara had proven herself, beyond any reasonable doubt, worthy of the title she was set to receive. The preparations for the wedding consumed the following weeks, the entire castle alive with activity, in a way it hadn't been since before Seraphine's death, and Elara found herself, more than once, overwhelmed by the sheer generosity extended toward her by pack members, who had once regarded her with open suspicion. Agnes took personal charge of the wedding feast, insisting on preparing every dish herself despite her advancing years. Several of the younger pack women, who had once whispered cruelly about her rank, now approached with genuine warmth, offering assistance with wedding preparations that Elara accepted with cautious but growing trust. Amid the preparations, Elara found quiet moments to reflect on the journey that had brought her to this point, from an exiled Omega with nothing but a bag of clothes and a letter of passage, to a woman about to become Luna of one of the most respected packs in the region. She thought often of her old pack, of the alpha who had cast her out for daring to question injustice, and felt, rather than bitterness, a quiet gratitude that his cruelty had ultimately led her toward a life far richer than anything she could have imagined remaining within his territory. She shared these reflections with Draven one evening, as they sat together in the nursery watching the twins sleep, a routine that had become, over the past year, the most treasured part of nearly every day. "I used to believe I would spend my whole life simply surviving," she admitted quietly. "Moving from place to place, never quite belonging anywhere, always waiting for the next rejection. I never imagined I would find this. A home, a family, someone who loves me exactly as I am." "You deserve far more than surviving," Draven said softly, taking her hand in his. "You deserve every bit of happiness this life can offer, and I intend to spend the rest of my days making certain you have it." "You already have," Elara said, leaning into him with a contentment that settled deep and unshakable in her chest. "Every single day since I walked into this nursery, you've given me more than I ever thought possible." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their children sleep peacefully in the soft evening light, and Elara felt, with complete certainty, that whatever challenges still waited in the years ahead, she would face them exactly as she had faced everything since arriving at Ashwood, with courage, with honesty, and with the steady, unwavering love of a family she had never expected to find, but would treasure for the rest of her life. 2 nights before the wedding, Draven found Elara standing at the nursery window, watching the stars scatter across the clear spring sky, a quiet contemplation in her expression that drew him gently to her side. "Nervous?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "A little," she admitted, leaning back into his embrace. "Not about marrying you. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. But becoming Luna, standing before this entire pack, and formally taking on that responsibility, it still feels larger than I quite know how to hold." "You've been holding responsibilities larger than most Lunas manage for months now," Draven said gently. "You held this pack's future in your arms every single day, long before any title made it official. The ceremony changes nothing, except finally giving the pack the words to properly name what you've already become." Elara turned in his arms to face him, warmth and certainty settling over the last traces of her nervousness. "How did you become so wise, my king?" "I had an excellent teacher," Draven said, smiling softly. "A quiet kitchen omega, who taught me that trust, once broken, can still be rebuilt, if you're patient enough and brave enough to let it." She rose onto her toes to kiss him gently, the nursery quiet and peaceful around them, their children sleeping soundly just steps away, and felt, in that simple, intimate moment, the full weight of everything the past year had brought them. Grief transformed into healing, isolation transformed into belonging, and a fragile, uncertain beginning transformed, slowly and completely, into a love that neither prejudice nor tragedy had managed to break. 2 days from now, she would stand before the entire pack as their Luna, but tonight, in the quiet warmth of the nursery that had first brought them together, she was simply Elara, deeply and completely loved, standing beside the man and the children who had given her, at long last, a place to truly call home. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed, to Elara, almost too fitting to be believed. She stood in the small chamber adjoining the great hall, Agnes fussing over the final details of her gown, a simple but elegant creation of pale silver that caught the morning light with quiet grace, while outside the chamber's window, she could hear the growing sounds of the entire pack gathering in the courtyard below. "Nervous?" Agnes asked, echoing Draven's question from 2 nights before, as she adjusted the delicate circlet resting atop Elara's dark hair. "Terrified," Elara admitted with a small laugh, though the smile that accompanied the word carried none of the fear it named. "But happily so, if that makes any sense." "It makes perfect sense," Agnes said, her weathered face softening into a rare, genuine smile. "I've watched a great many people pass through these halls over the years, girl. I've never seen anyone earn their place here as thoroughly as you have. Whatever nerves you're carrying today, know that you've more than proven yourself worthy of the title you're about to receive." The words settled warmly in Elara's chest, and she found herself blinking back unexpected tears as Agnes finished the final adjustments to her gown and stepped back to admire her work. A soft knock interrupted the moment, and Callum appeared in the doorway, dressed in his own formal attire, an unusually gentle expression softening his typically stern features. "The king is ready," he said. "And so, I believe, is the entire pack. They're eager to see their new Luna." Alara took a steadying breath, gathering the last of her composure, and followed Callum through the castle's familiar corridors toward the Great Hall, where Draven waited beside their two children, both dressed in miniature versions of formal wedding attire that made her heart swell with tenderness the moment she saw them. The hall itself had been transformed for the occasion, draped in soft spring flowers and warm golden fabric. The entire pack gathered in respectful, joyful silence as Alara made her way down the central aisle toward the small dais where Draven waited. She kept her eyes fixed on him throughout the walk, drawing strength from the open warmth in his expression, the unmistakable pride and love that softened every line of his face as he watched her approach. When she finally reached his side, Rowan reached up immediately to grasp a fold of her gown, and Ivy, held securely in Draven's arms, offered a delighted, gap-toothed smile that drew soft laughter from the gathered pack, easing the last of the ceremony's formal tension into something warmer, more genuinely joyful. The pack's eldest elder, a woman named Beatrice who had served Ashwood's royal family for decades, stepped forward to lead the ceremony, her voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. "We gather today to witness a joining, not merely of two hearts, but of a family already bound by love, proven through trial and hardship. Few unions in Ashwood's long history have been tested so thoroughly before their formal beginning, and few have proven themselves so completely worthy of the bond they now seek to make eternal." She turned to Draven first. "Draven Ashford, King of Ashwood, do you take Alara Bennett as your Luna, your equal partner in leading this pack, and your beloved companion for the whole of your life?" "I do," Draven said, his voice steady and certain, carrying easily across the hushed hall, "without hesitation, and without any doubt remaining in my heart." Beatrice turned to Alara. "Alara Bennett, do you take Draven Ashford as your mate, your king, and your partner in building whatever future still waits for this pack, and the family you have already begun building together?" "I do," Alara said, her voice carrying the same unwavering certainty, though emotion thickened it slightly. "With my whole heart, for as long as I live." The formal bonding that followed carried the full weight of pack tradition. Ancient words spoken in the old tongue, a joining of hands marked by symbols of loyalty and partnership, passed down through generations of Ashwood's royal line. But for Alara, the true significance of the moment lay not in the ceremony's formal elements, but in the simple, overwhelming certainty of standing beside Draven and their children, formally recognized at last as the family they had already, in every meaningful sense, become. When Beatrice finally pronounced them bonded, King and Luna of Ashwood, the great hall erupted into genuine celebration, the pack's cheers echoing warmly off the stone walls, and Draven pulled Alara close for a kiss that sealed the ceremony with the same tenderness that had defined every moment of their journey together. From that first desperate night in the nursery to this joyful culmination in the sunlit hall. The celebration continued long into the evening, the great hall filled with music and laughter, feast tables laden with Agnes's finest cooking, and pack members from every corner of Ashwood's territory gathering to offer their congratulations to a king and Luna whose love had, in the span of a single year, transformed their entire community. Alara found herself, at one point in the evening's festivities, standing near the hall's edge, with Draven beside her, watching their pack celebrate with a warmth and unity that had felt impossibly distant during her first uncertain days at Ashwood. "Do you remember?" Draven said quietly, following her gaze across the joyful crowd. "That first night, when Kale wouldn't let anyone near this door, not even me." "I remember," Alara said softly. "I remember thinking I had never seen anyone look so lost as you looked that night, standing frozen outside your own children's door." "I was lost," Draven admitted. "Completely and entirely. I don't think I fully understood how lost, until you walked past me into that room and showed me what I'd forgotten how to do myself." "You found your way back," Alara said, leaning into him. "That's what matters. Not how lost you were, but how far you've come since." Draven pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, watching as Callum lifted a delighted, giggling Ivy into the air nearby, as Rowan chased after one of the pack's younger children, with the fearless enthusiasm of a boy utterly unburdened by the grief that had once threatened to define his earliest months. "I couldn't have found my way back without you," Draven said. "I want you to know that, fully and completely, on this day above all others. You didn't just heal my wolf, Elara. You gave me back my entire life, and gave our children a mother's love they'd been missing since the day they were born." Elara felt tears gathering again, though happiness, rather than grief, prompted them this time. "And you gave me a home," she said softly, "a family, a place where I finally belong, exactly as I am, without needing to prove my worth through anything more than simply being myself." They stood together in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching their family and their pack celebrate around them, and Elara felt, with complete and unwavering certainty, that whatever the future held, whatever challenges still waited beyond Ashwood's walls, she would face them exactly as she had faced everything since that first desperate night in the nursery. With courage, with honesty, and with a love that had proven, through every trial the past year had thrown against it, strong enough to heal even the deepest wounds grief could carve into a heart, strong enough to build, from the ashes of tragedy, a family bound not merely by blood or circumstance, but by a devotion neither prejudice nor fear, nor tradition itself had ever managed to break. As the last light of the wedding day faded into a warm spring evening, Draven Ashford stood in the great hall of the pack he had nearly lost himself trying to protect, his Luna beside him, his children laughing nearby, and felt, for the first time in over a year, the complete and settled peace of a man who had finally, fully, found his way home. And in the nursery down the quiet corridor, where a king's wolf had once refused to let anyone near his grieving heart, a new chapter had already begun, one built not on the sorrow of what Ashwood had lost, but on the enduring strength of everything its king, its Luna, and its future had, together, found.